Hello, I'm Richard Gizbert, and you're at the Listening Post. This week, don't mention the war. The stories that the U.S. media aren't talking about as they obsess over the presidential election campaign. He's got the girl, but has Nicolas Sarkozy seduced the French media as well? Cruising the web for the world's most famous Scientologist. And a website for sore eyes.
Hey there, welcome to Red State Update. My name's Jackie Bros. Yes, sir.
Red State Rednecks Get Political. Welcome back. We're still in the starting stages of the American presidential elections. There's a long way to go in terms of coverage before November comes around. And yet the intensity and scale of the media interest in the U.S. is unprecedented. Blame it on the part web-based media is playing or on the wide-open race, but is the saturation coverage of the primaries, especially in the U.S., leaving important foreign policy stories that would normally attract coverage off the news agenda? That's our starting point this week, the U.S. elections, the focus on Hillary, Huckabee, Obama, and McCain, and the increasingly domestic obsessions of the American news media. It is an extraordinary news story. With no clear favorite, the White House is up for grabs. And for the first time ever, a woman and an African American have a real chance to be elected to the most powerful position on earth.
The campaign is simply overwhelming any other aspect, any other story in the American news media.
There is a media frenzy going on, a media circus. The Hillary Clinton juggernaut versus the Obama bandwagon. And this is the show now.
I think it's a very simple explanation. I think there's a tendency of people to gravitate to power.
And judging by the amount of coverage, this is the ultimate power story. The Washington-based Project for Excellence in Journalism conducted a week-long survey earlier this month. It found almost half the stories in the U.S. news media, 49%, were on the presidential campaign, compared to just 4% on President Bush's trip to the Middle East. So for every story on the president talking about the Palestine-Israel conflict or Iran, there were 12 stories on the race to succeed him. That's something the media in the Middle East picked up on.
The United States, heavily focused on the ongoing presidential primaries, has downplayed the Bush visit to Israel.
Inside America itself, the election is the primary election is the primary concern. It's the most important thing. It's the biggest game in town at the moment. So you can't divert your attention to other issues. What's happening in Gaza, Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Somalia, in Darfur, and everywhere else in Pakistan is of secondary importance to the average American. Maybe of importance to the people in the State Department, but not to the average American.
In the beginning of 2007, the overwhelmingly dominant story was the war in Iraq. It was in the headlines every day. As the surge went on, it also became clear that there was less violence emanating from Iraq. Less violence meant less media coverage. The story moved off the front pages. And really, it's fair to say, for the last quarter of 2007 and into 2008, we have simply seen the focus on the presidential campaign overwhelm every other issue. Not just trips to the Middle East by President Bush, but frankly, the war that 160,000 Americans are still fighting every day.
The Palestinian Authority is taking some action towards decreasing the magnitude of the human crisis in Gaza.
Other stories, such as the one in Gaza that received extensive coverage in the Middle East, have also been overshadowed in the U.S. The American academic Juan Cole theorized on his site informed comment that it is a perfect time for the Israeli government to commit a war crime on the miserable civilians of the Gaza Strip. The U.S. primary season has created a news blackout on U.S. television about foreign news. So most Americans will never even know that the Israelis cut off fuel to Gaza's power plant, depriving tens of thousands of people of electricity.
I don't think Israel particularly cares about what the Western media does or what the United States government is doing or where people's attention is. My guess is that the Israelis would continue doing what they're doing anyway in Gaza. They prefer to have less media coverage, obviously, but this is what Israel is doing now is consistent with its policies for the last 50 or 60 years.
Election coverage in the U.S. has all the hallmarks of the big story, right down to the graphics the networks hope will brand their coverage to make their channels the go-to place for American viewers.
Live from America's newsroom, I'm Lori Dew, and this is the Fox Report.
But for all the analysis and expertise they offer and the polls they conduct, the American media have been consistently wrong on this story.
And we start, as Greg mentioned, with the GOP candidates and their bid to become the President of the United States.
Time and time again, they have pronounced a candidate to be the new front runner. Time and time again, they've been mistaken.
And people speculate, frankly, whether that is a reaction to the voting public not allowing the media to pick the winner. So we have a very shaky track record, and the impulse to predict, to prognosticate, to pick winners, to tier the field never seems to be dramatically reduced despite these past embarrassments, frankly. Every time the media seems to anoint the front runner, Republican voters say, hey, hold on, wait a minute. As a matter of fact, so do Democrats for that matter.
This election is still more than 10 months away, but expect the trajectory of the story to fluctuate. Once the two main parties choose their nominees, there will be a lull in the coverage, which will pick up again in the final months leading up to the November vote. And if another story does knock the election off the front page in the U.S., it probably won't be about Iraq, Gaza, or Iran. It will probably be the economic story if the market meltdown continues.
Conditions in the United States, the bad shape of the economy, tend to impose themselves on the media and on the candidates. If you remember, Bill Clinton, a virtual unknown at that time, beat George Bush Sr. over a simple slogan, it's the economy stupid. And I think, again now, it's the economy that is the most important issue.
Ultimately, it's money that will decide this election, whether it's pocketbook issues for American voters or the bottom line for the U.S. media.
In the U.S., the media is a business. They will do whatever they need to do to get audience share, to sell advertising.
The Democratic presidential candidates debate from the Las Vegas Cashman Center.
This is what the American people want, this is what the audiences want, and the media caters for it.
That's what the news media's menu consists of these days, even if there is a hunger for other, more distant stories to be told. Our Global Village Voices now with their views on how the U.S. primaries are affecting the news agenda.
American media has this fixation on one major story at a time. The major story now is the presidential elections in the United States at the exclusion and expense of all else. And that all else can be some major significant stories, like the lack of coverage, or at least the in-depth coverage of the Israeli assault on the imprisoned, quote-unquote, unoccupied people of the Gaza Strip.
Right now in America, we have a serious problem because the media just seems to be showcasing only the elections and the presidential campaigns. I think that the media here is controlled by 6 different companies or corporations. And those corporations have strong political affiliations in Washington. So when you have those two groups in bed together, so to speak, you're going to have and see those kinds of problems.
The goal of the American news media is to get a Democrat elected into the White House. That's why the emphasis in the news media was the caucuses, because they have an agenda. And President Bush does not fit that agenda, and the Middle East does not fit that agenda.
We have the technology to get you on the air as one of our Global Village Voices. Just email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. We'll show you how to stop yelling at your television set and how to start doing something about the media through a webcam. Some quick hits now from the world of media. Listening Post News Bites. Journalists in Indonesia are warning that there's a media effort underway to rewrite the Suharto legacy as the country's former president fights for his life in a Jakarta hospital. Several leading media figures wrote an article complaining that excessive TV coverage of Suharto's recent health scare might foster sympathy for a man whose legacy still haunts many in the country. TV stations, some of which are closely connected to Suharto's family and friends, have repeatedly aired video of Suharto in the hospital. Suharto is held responsible for policies that led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of ethnic Chinese, as well as Christians in East Timor during his 30-year reign. He was also accused of embezzling hundreds of millions of dollars from the state. The chairman of Indonesia's Alliance of Independent Journalists wrote of the media, "Forgiving this one person will hurt millions of lives." The authorities in Turkey are still struggling to come to terms with and deal with the impact of the world of video sharing. They've banned YouTube again for hosting videos that Turkey considers insulting to the country's founding father, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. It's an ongoing problem, the result of a YouTube war between Greek and Turkish users of the site. YouTube confirmed that access to the site has been restricted for what the Turkish government called belittling Turkish identity. That's a crime in Turkey under a widely criticized media law known as Article 301. And YouTube has also attracted the ire of the California-based Church of Scientology this past week after a video made it onto the site showing the most famous Scientologist of them all, Tom Cruise, giving his views on the movement.
I think it's a privilege to call yourself a Scientologist, and it's something that you have to earn. We are the authorities on getting people off drugs. We are the authorities on the mind. We are the authorities on improving conditions.
The video was actually produced back in 2004 for internal use by Scientologists and made public by a disgruntled member of the church. It was picked up by celebrity gossip sites like Gawker and Defamer, who were then chased down by Scientology lawyers claiming infringement of copyright. Gawker has insisted the piece was newsworthy, it kept it on its site, and TV talk show hosts such as Craig Ferguson on the American network CBS said they couldn't air the video for fear of being sued, so they just satirized it.
Hey, this be's worse than a VPL. I have canceled that in my area.
Coming up after the break, the French media and their love affair with President Sarkozy.